Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We really appreciate all of your interest and taking time to join us today. So on the night of July 30th, a tragedy unfolded in Mukilteo, Washington. A deeply troubled young man with ready access to a deadly weapon opened fire at a party, killing 3 young people: Anna Bowie, Jake Long, and Jordan Ebner. Another teen, Will Kramer, was wounded in that attack. The shooter used an assault weapon, an AR-15 rifle. News reports indicate that the gun was loaded with a 30-round magazine. Massacres like this have become all too common across our country. We grieve, we hold vigils, we offer our prayers and condolences. We promise to remember those we've lost. Sometimes our leaders pledge to take steps to stop those tragedies. Sometimes changes are proposed and the debates last for days or weeks. Yet we still stand here today with laws and policies that allow shooters to reach for these weapons and destroy lives in seconds. Military-style weapons are designed for killing people. The AR-15 was originally designed for military use and still shares many characteristics with its current military counterparts. These weapons have no place in civilian use, where they all too often fall into the wrong hands. As Attorney General, one of my highest responsibilities is protecting the public safety. To that end, working with legislators and stakeholders, I will propose a bill in the upcoming legislative session with 2 key elements. First, a ban on the sale of assault weapons, and second, a ban on high-capacity magazines. So this will be agency request legislation from my office that goes through the normal legislative process with the legislators who you'll be meeting shortly. I'm joined and proud to be joined today by so many lawmakers and community leaders who support today's announcement. I want to thank them for joining us. As I just mentioned to them in the hallway, they're all busy people, and they have a lot of places they can be right now. Their presence speaks volumes about the broad support for this proposal. There's a handout listing today's attendees. Peter, I believe we've handed out to folks, available for your reference, but I do want to take a minute to introduce each of them to you. It's a large list, so bear with me. So first, our speakers I'll introduce, and you'll be hearing from them shortly. Dr. Liz Raymond, mother of Will Kramer; Paul Kramer, father of Will Kramer; Senator David Frock, who will be joined by Senator Ranker; Mukilteo Mayor Jennifer Gregerson; Seattle Police Chief Kathleen O'Toole; and Pastor Kerry Anderson of First African Methodist Episcopal Church. Other attendees we have include the following individuals: Reverend Steve Baber, Seattle City Councilmember Sally Bagshaw, King County Councilmember Claudia Balducci, Highland County Prosecuting Attorney Greg Banks, Senator Reuben Carlisle, King County Councilmember Rod Dembowski, Representative Justin Farrell, Ceasefire Board President Ralph Fascitelli, Lake Forest Park City Council Vice President Tom French, San Juan County Prosecuting Attorney Randy Gaylord, Seattle City Council Member Lorena Gonzalez, King County Councilmember Larry Gossett, Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle CEO and President Nancy Greer, Senator Cyrus Habib, Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes, Representative Zach Hudgens, Tacoma City Councilmember Anders Ibsen, Senator Pramila Jayapal, Reverend Carol Jenkins, Seattle City Councilmember Deborah Juarez, King County Councilmember Jeannie Cole-Wells, Washington State Insurance Commissioner Mike Kreidler, who, by the way, I'll just mention when I called him up about this event, he reminded me that back in 1994, he was a member of Congress who voted for the federal assault weapons ban. So as you can see, a number of folks here have a very long history on this issue. Representative Patty Kuderer, Senator Marco Lias, who also represents the Mukilteo area, by the way, King County Councilmember Joe McDermott, Pastor Tony Montgomery of the Tacoma Ministerial Alliance, Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle Government and Community Affairs Manager Max Potashnik, Representative Strom Peterson, also from the Mukilteo area, Representative Jerry Paulette, Pastor Michael Perder, Representative Eric Pettigrew, Michael Ramos of the Church Council of Greater Seattle, Senator Kevin Ranker, Shoreline Mayor Chris Roberts, Ceasefire Board Member Jordan Royer, Representative Cindy Ryu, Representative Tana Sen, Ceasefire Board Member Robert Silver, Bellevue City Council Member Bandana Slatter, Bellevue Mayor John Stokes, Mukilteo business owner Terry Thomas, Kirkland Mary Amy Wallen, Representative Brady Walkinshaw, Pastor Lawrence Ricky Willis, and Shoreline Deputy Mayor Sherry Winstead. There are a lot of folks, of course, who wanted to be here, but the timing just didn't quite work out. As you can imagine, logistically, there was some challenge. I just want to mention one person in particular, Actually, one more addition today, by the way. Matt Eisenhower of Congresswoman Del Bene's district director. Appreciate Congressman Del Bene's office being represented. And one person who could not attend, he really was actually, if not my first call, one of my very first calls is Seattle City Council member Tim Burgess. For those who have worked on this issue know Tim has been involved in this issue for a long time, and I'm sorry he could not make it today. Unfortunately, the tragedy in Mukilteo is not unique. Orlando, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook Elementary, Fort Hood. Unlike several other states, however, Washington does not presently ban assault weapons, nor does current Washington state law limit the capacity of magazines. A study by Mayors Against Illegal Guns found that incidents where assault weapons or large capacity ammunition magazines were used resulted in 135% more people shot and 57% more people killed compared to other mass shootings. According to a study from Johns Hopkins, a national ban on high-capacity magazines would prevent 100 homicides and 500 people from being wounded by shootings every year. There's no one reason shooters decide to open fire. There's no one weapon they all use. And likewise, I am aware that there is no one piece of legislation that will stop a societal problem as big and complex as our epidemic of gun violence. But that should not paralyze us from doing what we can. Here's the framework from our proposal, and you'll hear more from Senator Frock shortly about this. First, our proposal bans the sale of semi-automatic weapons with certain military-style features. That's number one. Number two, the bill prohibits the sale of large-capacity magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds. Those who suggest we have to choose between our Second Amendment rights and children being massacred in their schools, they're presenting a false choice. Let me be clear. I support the Second Amendment, and I support the right to bear arms. But just as the First Amendment does not grant you the right to yell fire in a crowded theater, the Second Amendment is not without limit. Simply put, assault weapons bans are constitutional. The Supreme Court has held that governments can enact reasonable gun regulations to protect the public. In fact, since 2008, assault weapon bans in New York, Connecticut, the District of Columbia, and Illinois have been upheld by 3 different federal courts of appeals. The Supreme Court allowed each of those decisions to stand. Will passing this legislation be a challenge? You bet. But working with the individuals here today, and many others in the coming months, I intend to ask members of the legislature the following simple question. Who do you choose to stand with? The gun lobby, or Washingtonians like Liz Raymond and Paul Kramer, who've experienced, all too clearly, the damage done by assault weapons in the wrong hands? It's a simple question. I think it's a fair question. I think it's a question that the people of the state of Washington deserve an answer from their elected officials. And if it doesn't pass this session, and I intend it to pass this session, I will bring it back next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, until it is passed. So now to provide more details on this legislation, I'm going to ask Senators Ranker and Senators Frock, who have both been deeply involved in this issue for many years, to come and provide some additional information for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Ferguson. My name is David Frock. I represent the 46th District, and I serve on the Senate Law and Justice Committee. This is Senator Ranker, who represents the 40th District and is the top returning Democrat on the Senate Ways and Means Committee. Again, thank you, Attorney General Ferguson, for your leadership on proposing assault weapons legislation. I believe you may be the first Attorney General to propose this policy and one of the first nationally. And as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in our state, we appreciate your strong commitment to making Washington State a safer community. And in particular, in your aggressively putting the full weight of your office behind this policy proposal. We're going to hear from the Mr. Kramer and Dr. Raymond in a moment, but I want to thank you again for being here. Reverend Anderson, Mayor Gregerson, our condolences, Mayor Gregerson, for your community. Reverend Anderson, we appreciate you being here for your words of inspiration. Senator Ranker and I and the other legislators and lawmakers behind us will be working with the Attorney General on this request legislation to be introduced when the legislature reconvenes in January. We believe that the policy will make Washington safer and lead over time to a reduced risk of mass shootings like the ones we have witnessed in Newtown, Aurora, Dallas, Baton Rouge, and now Mukilteo, to name just a few where assault weapons were the weapon of choice for the mass shooter. Now, In developing this proposal with the Attorney General, there are a few basic concepts worth mentioning. The first is that what we are interested in doing is taking assault weapons and large capacity magazines out of the commercial and private marketplace in Washington on a going forward basis so that an individual like Alan Ivanov, who couldn't even legally buy a six-pack of beer, can no longer legally buy an assault weapon in the state of Washington for the purpose of committing mass murder. We are cognizant of the fact that there are thousands of these weapons owned by Washingtons and millions nationally. While we believe this proposal is one of many policies that can make a difference in preventing mass shootings over time, it is obvious that the change we seek will need to take place over time. This leads to the second concept. Every state that has passed an assault weapons ban has grandfathered in legally owned pre-ban weapons, with the sole exception of the District of Columbia. This legislation that the Attorney General is working on will do the same as every other state. We anticipate grandfathering in possession of weapons already owned prior to the effective date, as well as a list of common sense exemptions included for on-duty law enforcement and military, some target shooting and hunting, and inheritance, among others. This legislation will not propose gun registration. Generally, however, as the Attorney General mentioned, the manufacture, sale, and transfer of assault weapons and large capacity magazines would be prohibited after the date the law goes into effect. And finally, a word about public opinion. A poll released in July by Washington Ceasefire and Ceasefire Oregon showed that 65% of the people in Washington and Oregon favor a ban on assault weapons, and 63% favor a 10-bullet limit on ammunition magazines. Nationally, a CBS News poll in June found that 57% of Americans support a ban on assault weapons. The same poll revealed that 45% of Republicans supported a ban. A variety of other polls have showed majority support for this legislation. There's a website, you can check it out if you want to do that, pollingreport.com. I was looking at it last night. These are polls from McClatchy, Quinnipiac, a number of other reputable polling organizations in recent months, and the data is very clear. So I think there's no doubt that there is broad public support for taking action on the assault weapons issue. We are most appreciative, Attorney General Ferguson, of your leadership here today, and we look forward to working with you in the coming session. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Frock and Senator Ranker, for your support and work on this legislation. The next two speakers are the parents, the mother and father of Will Kramer, who, as I mentioned earlier, survived the Mukilteo shooting. So I want to especially thank them for their willingness after that terrible event to come before all of you and a bank of cameras and a room full of folks to talk about this and their experience. So first, we'll hear from Dr. Liz Kramer.
Hello, my name is Liz Raymond Hartley, and I was asked by Senator David Frock and others to speak about my personal experience as the mother of Will Kramer, who was shot in the back by a man with an assault rifle in Mukilteo this summer. 3 of his friends and classmates died, and many others were traumatized. I don't think that my personal experience compares in any way to that of the families who lost children that night. But imagine the real nightmare of the police pounding on your door in the middle of the night to tell you that your son was shot and he's on his way to Harborview. And then imagine your son in the ICU, learning that 3 of his friends died, and that he has a bullet wound an inch from his spine and a lung collapse, and he's lost a significant amount of blood. There's no describing the horror that all of the victims, the witnesses, and the families have had to endure since this tragedy. From paralyzing fear to profound grief. I hope that none of you ever have to go through anything like this. I want to speak out against the disgrace and the insanity of our government continuing to allow military-style assault rifles to be easily available for purchase despite the increasing frequency of these shootings. These guns are marketed and used to kill many people in a short period of time. They are the weapon of choice of our country's mass murderers. These guns are not used in self-defense. They're called assault rifles, even advertised as such, and assault is a crime. Our children aren't safe in schools, places of worship, restaurants, malls, workplaces, or even in their own homes. Is this the new normal for our society? Are we supposed to just give up and tell ourselves that the rights of these mass murderers trump our rights as citizens? I don't think so, and neither does the vast majority of the public. Legislators, we put our trust in you to keep Washington safe. We can take steps to decrease these incidents of mass killing if we ban the sale of assault rifles. Please stop honoring the desires of would-be assassins to purchase assault rifles and instead place value on the safety and freedom of our law-abiding citizens. Because without a ban on these guns, there will be more mass shootings, like the one in Mukilteo that ended the lives of 3 beautiful, promising young students and injured our son. Thank you.
And next we'll be hearing from Will's father, Paul.
Yeah, it's going to work. Thank you all for being here today. It is encouraging to be here with some hope for positive change in our Washington state laws. My son, Will, whom I love, was nearly killed in Mukilteo 5 weeks ago by an angry young man with an AR-15 type semi-automatic rifle. 3 of his young friends were killed that night in a senseless act of violence that most likely would have been prevented if this type of weapon were not readily available for sale. The 19-year-old shooter had purchased the weapon a few days prior to his rampage from a local retail purveyor of firearms. My son spent 17 days in the hospital recovering from his wounds, which included heavy blood loss, a broken scapula, a cracked rib, bullet fragments lodged in tissues in his upper left chest, contusions and a laceration to his left lung, and a near total collapse of his lung. I want to thank Mukilteo Mayor Jennifer Gregerson for her strong leadership following this tragedy in Mukilteo, and for her courage to stand in support of this legislation here today. I want to thank Attorney General Bob Ferguson and his staff for their ongoing work in drafting and promoting this proposed legislation to ban the sale of AR-15 type semi-automatic weapons and high-capacity magazines. While it's sad that we don't already have this type of legislation in place, I'm happy that action is being taken to have this legislation presented in a timely manner in the next legislative session. It is my hope that we can make Washington State safer and reduce the potential for mass shootings here. I have been heartbroken and shaken to the core of my being with grief and anguish by the recent tragedy in Mukilteo, where 3 19-year-olds were murdered and my son was nearly killed. Believe me, if we have any say, and I believe we do, we want to do what we can to stop this from happening elsewhere. Life is so very precious. It can be taken in a flash. I pray that we collectively find ways to live in peace, in harmony, and in love. This proposed legislation helps create that world.
Thank you, mayor of Mukilteo and her leadership in a deeply challenging time. And so now I'm proud to introduce to you Mayor Ferguson, the mayor of Mukilteo, Washington.
Thank you, Liz and Paul, for your words and for sharing all that you've experienced. In those early hours of Saturday, July 30th, our community was changed forever. We lost 3 beautiful lives, Jordan Ebner, Jake Long, and Anna Bowie. And Will was seriously injured, and dozens of young people went through something that no one should ever experience. It's good to see Liz and Paul here today and know and have the relief that Will is recovering from his injuries. He's doing so well, he's even made it to some Seahawks games, exemplifying his 12th man spirit. There's no words that can adequately express our gratitude for the bravery and courage of our first responders. Within 3 minutes of being dispatched, the first police units were on scene. It wasn't just our police and fire crews who were first responders that night, though. There were neighbors who heard pounding on their door in the middle of the night and opened that door to harbor strangers. They were first responders too. And I spoke with them in the days following that shooting, and they were so passionate about the issues that we're talking about today. In the end, those 3 families have experienced a pain that few can understand. Jordan, Jake, and Anna were taken too soon. Jordan Ebner was a student at Everett Community College, and he was living in Lake Stevens, but he said if he could live anywhere in the world, it would be Mukilteo. Jake Long was a gifted athlete who'd just come back from his first year of college. Anna Bowie was an amazing singer and a freshman at UW-Bothell. She'd recently come back with a renewed spirit and energy from a month-long trip to Europe with her sister. This cruel act of violence robbed 3 families of a lifetime of memories and love. These beautiful young people deserved many more tomorrows. Through media reports and court documents, we've learned more about the chilling facts of that horrible night. We've read about how a 19-year-old boy who's too young to buy alcohol or marijuana legally was able to purchase an assault weapon, how he sat in his car and read the instruction manual before unleashing unspeakable violence. The facts are clear. The shooter should not have had access to that weapon, plain and simple. I want to thank Attorney General Ferguson for his leadership in making sure that more families and no more communities have to go through what we have. There's many tragedies that happened on July 30th. Tragedies for the family who lost so much, but also a tragedy for the shooter's family as well. He's only 19 years old. His mind is still developing, and now it will develop in prison. And our kids, for that, all we have left are memories. We need to stop these tragedies in any way and every way that we can. Jordan, Jake, and Anna gave our world many gifts during their lives. Beautiful music, amazing plays on the baseball field, smiles, and a lot of love. I hope all of us will remember them and honor them and use this sad moment to find in ourselves a stronger and better community.
Next, I'm pleased to introduce the Seattle Police Chief, Chief O'Toole. I thank her very much for taking time from her schedule to be here and to share a few words about this proposal from a law enforcement perspective. Chief O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Attorney General Ferguson. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here too, and I'm heartened to see so many of our elected officials and community members here with us. I particularly thank Will's parents for their courage in stepping forward and engaging in a conversation about this very important issue. In more than 35 years of public service in policing, I've certainly seen firsthand the devastating impact of gun violence on individuals, families, and communities. And as we've heard here today, this isn't an issue just for urban centers. We've heard the horrific story of Mukilteo and the devastation that gun violence has left there. Here in Seattle, certainly were concerned about assault rifles. Our own beloved community leader, Donnie Chin, was killed by a bullet that came from an assault rifle. Common sense and practical approaches that protect the Second Amendment and address an area of crime prevention that we all agree on, we have to pass legislation in this state. Individuals should not have easy access to assault weapons. In law enforcement, our biggest successes come when we focus on prevention and intervention. Enforcement should be the last resort, and this would be a wonderful prevention tool. In Washington State, it's actually easier, as our legislators mentioned, for someone under 21 to purchase an AR-15 assault rifle than it is to purchase a pistol. And as we've seen throughout the country, police are responding to volatile situations, and we're often outgunned, whether it's in Dallas or Baton Rouge or so many other tragedies that have occurred out there. Over 90% of officers feloniously killed in the line of duty die from gunfire, and many of those deaths are caused by assault rifles. Violence and the instruments of violence affect us all. I'm pleased that we're talking about this in Washington State, that we're talking about it as a community, and I really appreciate the invitation to be a part of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And our final speaker before we turn to your questions, it's now my privilege to introduce Pastor Kerry Anderson, who many of you know, of Seattle's first African Methodist Episcopal Church. It's the first African American church in Seattle and the oldest congregation founded by African Americans in the Pacific Northwest. I've had the chance to listen to him on the radio talking about issues related to gun violence, and I really appreciate, Pastor, you taking the time to speak to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General. What many have thought would be a problem of tomorrow has become a problem of today, and that is the devastation that assault weapons can bring to our community. In essence, tomorrow is today. And I stand with the Attorney General, state legislators, parents, civic servants, community-based leaders, clergy, and faith communities across this community and city to say that we are now in a defining moment in our time, and we must face, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, the urgency of now. Now is the time for this proposed legislation to take effect. Now is the time for the community to rise up from ashes and put feet to our prayers. Now is the time to create a difference politically in our state. Many of you know June 17th, 2015 in Charleston, South Carolina. Mother Emanuel AME Church welcomed a young male into its Bible study. He was not only welcomed, he was invited to sit with them in the study, but he chose to take out a weapon and shoot and kill and murder 9 people in this study. As a result, those survivors, and there were 3 that came to the Pacific Northwest just this past summer, to our church in Tacoma, Washington. They embraced him and they forgave him. But we must now do something to make sure that these things do not continue to happen. People like the Kramers can't continue to lose friends of their children. Mayors can't continue to have flags in their cities flown at half-staff. State legislators cannot continue to walk the pavement trying to get people to pass a Senate bill or a House bill and get it out of committee. The time is now. As Attorney General Ferguson said, First AME Church here in Seattle is the oldest African American church in the state of Washington. We are, in effect, the Mother Emanuel AME Church of this community. And as such, even as welcoming and inviting as we are, we have had to install just this past summer a 25-camera system for security inside of our church, costing approximately $30,000. We've had to implement a safety patrol ministry to monitor and watch people as they enter into the various entrances into our church. We've had to have police active shooter training, and I thank God for our Chief O'Toole because she allowed us to engage her crisis team to come in and train us on how to be on the lookout for suspicious behavior on our grounds. We want to keep our people safe. We want to keep our neighborhoods safe. Our church is open 24 hours a day. We've just opened a women's shelter in one of our fellowship halls in the basement that houses from 6:30 p.m. to the next morning, 7 a.m., single women. We must make sure that these ladies are kept safe. And so I stand with the Attorney General, I stand with these state legislators, I stand with these parents, I stand with these community leaders, faith-based leaders, and people of concern to say there is an urgency of now. First AME Church is affiliated with the Alliance for Gun Control and Responsibility. We work very closely with Faith Action Network. We are work very closely with the United Black Christian Clergy of Western Washington and other groups that are concerned about keeping our community safe. But if we don't do something now, when will it be done? If it's not us, who will it be? If it's not now, when will it come to pass? Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Pastor, and to all of our speakers, especially Paul and Liz, for being here today. And with that, we'll open to questions. For those who are on the phone, the way we typically do this is we'll start with questions for folks in the room. I'll do my best to repeat the question that is asked in the room so the folks on the phone can hear it. And also, for those who are answering the question, if you can try to remember to introduce yourself so the folks on the phone can identify who is speaking in answering the questions. So let's start with some questions from the room.
What do you say to critics that say folks who want to commit these crimes will get these type of weapons and magazines anyway?
So I'll start, but others should by all means jump in. I'll paraphrase the question. The question is, what would we say to critics who say that individuals who are bent on taking lives, how is this going to stop it? I think what I would respond is with facts. There are studies that show, and I mentioned them in my remarks, there are studies that demonstrate that by adopting an assault weapons ban like this, that you will cut down and save lives. It makes sense on many levels, right? If you limit the magazine capacity, somebody must stop to reload, for example, right? They do not have a 30-round magazine anymore, and that can make a difference. We saw a shooting here in Washington State where when the individual stopped to reload, he was tackled quite courageously by a college student who thereby prevented additional tragedy from unfolding. So in response, I believe in facts, right? I believe in studies that are respected, and those studies are clear. So I understand folks will say that. I understand the gun lobby will say that, but it simply is not factual. I'm happy to have anyone else add anything to the wish as well. So, next question.
The other side would probably also say that it's unconstitutional, the legislation. You're saying it's not. So could you explain from your perspective of why it's not unconstitutional?
Sure. So the question is, critics will say that a bill like this is unconstitutional. I'm saying it is constitutional. So why the difference? Again, The good news in answering that question is there are published court decisions that lay out thinking of federal courts, not just one federal court of appeals, not just two, 3 different federal courts of appeals have upheld assault weapons bans that will be very close to what we're proposing as we finalize language in a couple months, that those courts have said are constitutional. And in each of those cases, the Supreme Court allowed those decisions to stand. I want to be crystal clear on that. 3 different federal courts of appeals have looked at this issue in states like Connecticut and New York and said those are constitutional. So I can assure you and the people of the state of Washington that I'll be working hard with the legislators who are here today and other stakeholders to make sure that we craft a bill that meets the constitutional dictates of those courts. And because it's been accomplished in other states, there is absolutely no reason that we cannot accomplish that here with this legislation. And frankly, to suggest otherwise simply ignores the facts that there are published opinions on this just in the last decade or so. Other questions here in the room before we open up on the phone? Yes, and then we'll go to the phone, maybe Peter after this. Yeah, go right ahead.
Just reading from your website, you write that your office's role with regards to firearms is limited to determining states' concealed pistol licenses, which states are recognized under Washington's law. And so is this at all kind of an expansion of what you're trying to do in office, or a change in any way?
So the question for those online is whether or not what I'm proposing, supported by the folks in the room, is an expansion in some way of the authority of my office or what we've been doing in my office. No. And to elaborate just a little bit, as you know, each legislative session I propose and pass attorneys general, Rob McKenna, Chris Gregoire, have proposed agency request legislation. Now, typically, in proposing that legislation, anywhere from 6 to 10 bills a year, roughly, in which, by the way, we have a very high success rate. I believe more than half the bills we proposed since I became Attorney General have been passed and signed by the governor. So I choose my bills carefully, and I don't propose them unless I think they can pass. But in doing so, I propose legislation that relates to issues that I work on as Attorney General or that our office works on, consumer protection, as an example. But another one, of course, is as a top law enforcement officer for the people of the state of Washington, any legislation related to public safety is undoubtedly within the responsibility. In fact, it is, I view, an important requirement of my job, my authority as Attorney General, to be mindful at all times of public safety and to make sure I'm doing everything I can to ensure that the people of the state of Washington are safe. And that's why I'm proposing this legislation and why I believe it'll pass. So let's turn maybe up here. Do I need to do anything on the phone here?
Line should be open.
Great. So hopefully the line's open. I know for folks on the phone it's easy to sort of talk over one another, but let's just do our best. If folks on the line have a question, if you don't mind just introducing yourself so the folks in the room know who you are, that'd be great. And let's give this a shot. I think you go right ahead. I think we can hear you.
Okay, this is Paige from KUOW Public Radio. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on the first element of this legislation, the ban on certain assault weapons. Can you give an explanation on some examples of what those weapons look like? You said some of them carry military-style characteristics.
Yes, I think the folks in the room heard the question. It relates to specifics around the legislation. What types of weapons are we referring to in this legislation that we'll be drafting next couple months? And David, do you want to maybe?
Sure.
Senator David Frock will address that.
So the answer to the question is there are a number of states that have already proposed and passed legislation, and they typically have some of the legislation that has been passed, for example, in California and Connecticut, New York, call out specific brands of rifles, others, and then they also have a component which some would describe as a feature test. If you were here, what you would see is a picture of an AR-15 type rifle. There are many different brands of them, but they are sort of broadly characterized as AR-15 rifles. And so, this is one of the things I think conceptually we want to get right. This is certainly an important part of drafting a piece of legislation like this, and we understand that. There have been mistakes made in the past on how you put that together, but there are now examples out there in the state, and because the federal government is not taking any steps and will not take any steps to act, I mean, the ideal thing would be to have a federal law that was comprehensive to to govern this in the entire country, but since they're not, it's really incumbent upon states to act. And so I think we'll be looking closely at similar laws that had passed in, I think, 7 of the states.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Senator Frock. And just to add to that, and I think a point that Senator Frock made well is, we do have the benefit of examining closely those states that passed similar assault weapons bans. Each has slight differences. And back to an earlier question about constitutionality, it'll be important to frame one that is constitutional, number one, which we believe we can absolutely do. And number two, to benefit from the experience of other states, for example, where certain loopholes have been allowed, where gun manufacturers have been able to create assault weapons that have slipped through sort of the legislative intent, so to speak. This is going on in Massachusetts right now, as an example. So we want to make sure that we're working carefully. This is going to be detailed work, but we'll be working line by line on that to benefit from other states' experience and to craft the best legislation that we can. Other questions from those on the phone line? If not, any last questions from folks here?
Can you hear me? It's Walker Ornstein from the News Tribune.
Yes, go right ahead. Thank you.
Hi. Some gun control legislation or gun reform legislation hasn't exactly done so great in the legislature in the last couple of years. Why not take this in sort of a ballot measure form, like I-1491? I know similar legislation to this has not gained much traction in the legislature. Why not have the voters vote on it?
Thank you very much. I think Senator Ranker will start, and I may add to his answer. Senator Ranker.
This should not be a partisan issue. This should be a community-driven issue. And what we know is, as you're stating, a majority of the voters in Washington State support this sort of ban on assault weapons and on high-volume magazines. What we are doing, and the reason you're not being presented today with legislation that is finalized, is we are working with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make this a nonpartisan, very important bill that moves forward with community support from each of our communities. Keep in mind, I represent the 40th District. I have very rural agricultural land, and I have the city of Bellingham. We have people here from urban areas and from rural areas, and it's important that we recognize that this is really a community issue and not a partisan issue. So I believe the legislation has a chance, and if it doesn't, there can be other discussions. But as the Attorney General said, and I stand behind him on this, we'll bring it back until we get it passed.
So this is Bob again. I think Senator Ranker really covered it. I guess just to repeat what I said earlier is I do not propose bills that I do not think I can pass. I don't. I have a limited number that I can propose. We start with a large list of many dozens, and through the course of the year we whittle that down to a manageable number. And one of the key criteria that my team knows is that we believe there's a path for success. I don't believe in wasting my time. I don't believe in wasting the time of all the folks who are in this room. I don't believe in that. I believe in getting things done, even if it's hard. And will this be hard? You bet. Will the gun lobby engage on this issue? Absolutely. But that certainly does not deter me or the folks in this room. I believe we can get this done. And frankly, yes, we have an initiative process in the state, but we have a legislature for a reason, right? It is there to take up the issues of the day, as the pastor mentioned, right? The issues of the day. This is an issue of the day. It is an issue of the day. And in my view, it's their responsibility to take up this issue and to be accountable. Yes or no? You don't get to abstain, you don't get to take a pass, you're accountable to the people you represent. You're accountable. And I think the pastor mentioned, right, this is a time of choosing. And I fully intend to make it a choice before the legislature, so they must choose. And frankly, to exert whatever appropriate pressure I can as Attorney General to raise the profile of this issue and bring it to the legislature and have them make that choice. Any other questions online? Then we'll turn for folks back in the room, or on the phone rather, before we turn back to the room.
As it stands right now, how easy is it to get an AR-15? I don't know if you, and just how it could, in terms of going down to a line.
Sure, so the question, I'll maybe turn to some others. The question is for those online is how easy is it to obtain a weapon like an AR-15? The short answer, as you heard, is it's easier if you're a 19-year-old than buying a beer, right? So it's legal, and yeah, Senator, did you want to add? Senator Ranker, go right ahead.
All I was going to say is it's legal. So a 19-year-old can go in right now and buy an assault rifle. And we don't let them buy a six-pack of beer, but we'll let them buy an assault rifle. And I think that is a defining statement for our communities, and one that we should question. And in the end, regarding the legislation or a vote of the people, these tragedies have to stop. This can't be the norm in our communities. And so, to the earlier question about, won't the criminals just find a way to get them? Maybe some. But if we can limit one or two or a few people from getting an assault rifle easily, that's a goal that we should all try to attain.
So we take one more question here in the room, then we're going to be available, by the way, afterwards, obviously, to take questions one-on-one if folks have them. Yes?
I apologize for asking.
That's okay.
I'm unfamiliar with many of you. I'm just wondering if there are any Republicans with you today, or if you have Republicans in
We can, so this is Bob speaking, as I think it was Senator Ranker mentioned, that our objective is to obtain bipartisan support for this legislation. I will personally be sitting down with Republican legislators to talk about this legislation. I do that for every bill I propose. And I think every bill I have ever proposed, I believe, I'll turn to my legislative director, but I believe has had bipartisan support. So I take that seriously in every, or virtually every bill that I propose. And to be candid, for this particular gathering, as I mentioned at the outset, it was initially intended to be a relatively small gathering of folks, right? And it expanded, which I greatly appreciate. But no, you can be sure that all of us, including myself, will be meeting with all legislators to talk about this legislation. So with that, I thank everybody on the line for joining us. For those who are here in the room, we will be staying and happy to answer any questions you might have one-on-one. Again, a special thanks to Liz and Paul. I really appreciate it. Public speaking can sometimes not be easy, but I cannot imagine a more difficult public speech to give than and remarks given than the ones that they gave. So as a final thought, I am determined to pass this legislation. I want to be crystal clear with that. I will work every day on this. I am determined. I'll bring the breadth and experience of my office to this. I think the support that's here today, as I mentioned, when I call people up say, I'm going to be doing this, I want to give you a heads up, right, Senator Frock? The response was not great for the heads up. I want to be there. I want to be there. And many more who could not be here want to be here today. So I appreciate you being here, and we look forward to taking more questions after the press conference. Thank you very much.